the Hudson Library and Historical Society's Artist Biographical Series presents art historian Felicia Zavarella Stadelman, speaking about Art Nouveau artist Louis Comfort Tiffany. Recorded at the Hudson Library's Flood Meeting Room on April 10, 2014.
Good evening and welcome to the Hudson Library. Tonight is a continuation of our spring series of featured artists. At the end of the program, if you would please take a few moments of your time to fill out an evaluation of our program. So we like to use your feedback as to get ideas for programs in the future or what you liked about our program. That's very helpful to us. I'd like to welcome back Felicia Stadelman. She's going to present her continuation of her series of featured artists called Through the Eyes of the Artist. Tonight she will present on Louis Comfort Tiffany, and she's going to discuss how he used his own, he created his own industry to satisfy his own creative energy. So if you please welcome Felicia, thank you.
Welcome. I see so many familiar faces, so you must be enjoying the stories. I was just telling someone I studied art history for 6 years, and I never heard some of these stories until I started reading the letters, and it just really warms my heart to share what I've read with you, and so I appreciate it. And your responses have been overwhelming to the things that you fill out. I do appreciate all that. We appreciate the feedback. So, all right, let's get started. Who was Louis Comfort Tiffany? Well, the answer is all too often very superficial. He's the guy with the lamps. There is so much more to this exceptional artist who pioneered and innovated an American art form. But Tiffany is all about the lamps, right? Not true. In fact, the manufacturing of the lamps was a savvy business decision to use up all the glass pieces that were left over on the floor from all of the windows. And since he produced his own glass, he hated to see all that go to waste, so he had to find a way to use them. The lamps actually were an artistic embarrassment, Louis Comfort Tiffany would say, who supposedly never spoke about them or wrote about these objects as he referred to them, which ironically brought him the greatest amount of profit. So let's dispel all the rumors that we know about Louis Comfort Tiffany and begin to take a look into this extraordinary man's life, and it should help to answer the question, who was Louis Comfort Tiffany and what does he have to do with Tiffany's? I'm sure that's your next question. Hopefully, I'll be able to highlight his artistic genius. I guarantee you will never look at a stained glass window or a Tiffany window the same way again. I'm going to make you experts. Perhaps it doesn't happen often enough today, but historically when the art gene raised its stubborn head in the children of an American family, it's more likely that there will be an attempt to beat it down rather than to cultivate its growth. Nobody wants their child to be a starving artist, and especially in the Victorian days, in the 19th century, when to become an artist pretty much guaranteed that you would be the black sheep of the family. And nowhere was it more likely than in the ranks of the upper crust that you would be discouraged to be an artist, in which a Victorian era's baby's biography could almost be written before the umbilical cord was cut. A daughter was expected to choose a bright, ambitious husband, someone who was stable, live in a respectable brownstone in New York, vacation in the Hamptons, bear a brood of attractive children, and a son was expected to either embrace college or to work in the family business and achieve beyond the father's expectations. Fortunately for antique dealers all over the world today, one such Victorian-era baby rebelled against his noble obligation, and his name was Louis Comfort Tiffany. He was born on February 18th, 1848, to the family of Charles C. Tiffany, and his silver spoon came from his father's New York jewelry store empire. How many of you knew that Tiffany with the lamps was from Tiffany with the jewelry? Few of you didn't know that. I mean, it's kind of interesting, and I have to be honest with you. I never studied Louis Comfort Tiffany in the 6 years I went to school, and I never knew anything about the connection until I started reading a letter that was written to Tiffany from another artist I happened to be researching. So Charles Louis Tiffany was the founder of Tiffany and Company, the most prestigious purveyor of jewelry and timepieces and silver objects in the world. Shortly after the company opened in 1837, the name Tiffany became an international synonym for luxury and fine craftsmanship, good design, and excellent taste. By 1870, its Fifth Avenue store was the place where presidents and royalty acquired the gifts that they gave to the visiting heads of states. And he had clients like Queen Victoria of England, the Tsar of Russia, the leaders of all the European countries. By 1900, Tiffany and Company had over 1,000 employees working in its 4 branches located around the world. And Tiffany's personal fortune at that time was around $11 million. Translated into today's dollars, my husband did the calculation, somewhere around $4.5 billion. He was a wealthy man. The eldest son of Harriet and Charles, you know how I love my baby pictures. Look at he looks like Tiffany himself. Young Louis was raised in an environment of luxury and good design, and as a boy, he seemed to take to the craft of jewelry making, but despite his father's disappointment, he balked at going to college or taking over the family business. Absolutely refused even when he was threatened. Instead, he announced to the world, he said, I'm going to devote myself to fine arts, and I'm going to pursue my own quest for beauty. From 1862 until 1865, he attended the Eagleswood Military Academy in New Jersey. Now, he was very much a playboy in his early years, and a very wealthy one at that. So you can imagine he enjoyed himself, and he traveled very easily among the East Coast elite, developing a deep appreciation for decorative arts and good taste, and that just carried with him. In 1865, he traveled to Europe for the first time, and he toured England, Ireland, France, and Italy. And in London, he first visited the Victoria and Albert Museum, whose extensive collection of Roman and Syrian glass made a deep impression on him. He would talk about this visit to this museum for the rest of his life. What's interesting is today, the same museum possesses a fine collection of Tiffany glass. Now, while he was traveling around the world, he painted on site and he documented many of the places he visited, and he sketched and took photographs of everything that he experienced. Upon his return to New York, he enrolled for a year at the National Academy of Design, where in 1867 he first exhibited paintings from his European travels. It was also at this time that he met a famous American landscape painter by the name of George Inness. Incidentally, this picture, I don't know if it looks familiar to you, this painting, somewhere around the year 2000, it started popping up in like Bed Bath & Beyond and different places. And what's interesting is nobody really connects Louis Comfort Tiffany as a painter, and yet I'm seeing prints of this everywhere. I was at a hospital recently, and it was hanging up in the hallway. So this is one of the paintings that he did while he was traveling. So he meets the very famous landscape painter, George Inness, and he studies informally with him, but he preferred to visit the older artist's studio rather than to attend classes at the academy. Now, Inness was a tonalist painter, meaning the emotions in the painting are restful. And he had a great deal of influence from the Romantic Hudson River School, and he instilled in Tiffany a lifelong appreciation for nature. Inness was also in contact with a group of French landscape painters who, in the 1840s, settled in the village of Barbizon near the Fontainebleau, and they were known as the Barbizon School artists, and they included such important forerunners to Impressionism like Rousseau and Camille Corot, and Innes studied under the tutelage of many of these artists from the Barbizon school, so he was approaching where the independent artists or the impressionists were moving towards. And Innes shared with his young protege this philosophy that he learned very early on. He said, "The purpose of a painter is simply to reproduce in others' minds the impression that a scene is made upon them. A work of art does not appeal to intellect, it does not appeal to a moral sense, it does not aim or instruct or edify, it only is intended to awaken an emotion." Louis Comfort Tiffany kept these words on a small piece of paper in his pocket for the majority of his life. He took this understanding of art to heart, to awaken an emotion. Now, his desire to return to Europe was realized in 1868. Back in Paris, he briefly studied with an academic figure painter at the time, but he didn't really care for these teachers' strict approach to teaching art. He wanted to kind of explore things on his own. At some point after his return to New York in 1870, he was greatly influenced by Orientalism, the style that was popular at the time, and he infused the things that he learned from Innes through this Barbizon school training into the paintings that he was doing during this period in his time. He painted and he sketched landscapes and market scenes of cities that he visited, like Tangier and Morocco and Cairo and Egypt and Algiers. Of all the places that he visited, incidentally, it seems like North Africa made the greatest impression on him. And he excelled in depicting the landscapes and the exotic people of this country. Through his travels, he developed an interest and a deep appreciation for Islamic art and architecture and the ornamentation that build upon his fascination with the Romanesque and the Moorish and the Japanese decorative arts. He collected glassware and other objects from the towns that he traveled through. These pieces served as an inspiration in designing his later creations. Now, although he recorded many of the places he visited in his sketchbook and on canvas, he also took photographs that he used later in his studio to complete paintings and eventually to apply them to the studies of windows. And some of the surviving photographs have indicated that he took pictures of animals, particularly birds, in motion. One of his best-known paintings of this period is the Snake Charmer of Tangier. And he painted it during his stay in Tangier in 1872, and it's currently in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This work captures the magic and the mystery of that bizarre Middle Eastern tradition of hypnotizing a snake, along with an accurate depiction of the atmosphere and the locale. This was exhibited at the 1876 Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia, along with other Tiffany paintings. And 2 years later, 3 of his paintings were shown at the Paris exhibition in 1878. Now, Tiffany had a great ambition for his career as a fine artist, and he participated in no fewer than 27 exhibitions in his younger years. In 1870, at the tender age of 21, he was elected an associate member of the National Academy of Design in New York. Now, in 1877, he became founding member of the Society of American Artists, along with other artists like John Singer Sargent, James McNeill Whistler, and Thomas Eakins. This is when he was 28 years old. A lot of people look at that and say, how did he go from 17 to that? You know, this is just still a young man. He and other members of the society were credited at having set new standards for American art at the time, and as a result, by 1880, he had become a full member of the National Academy of Design. The public appreciated his works of art. I'm sorry, this is John Singer Sargent. They appreciated Tiffany's works of art as fine masterpieces. Now, despite this success and being recognized and awarded and honored with such honorary titles, he turns away from painting when he realized, in his words, that his lack of academic training would not allow him the widespread adulation that he craved and the personal wealth to which he had been accustomed. So basically, he was not going to make enough money and get enough recognition being a painter. The sheer number of painters, he said, with more skills than I, led me to seek out a less crowded field where I could more easily stand out and make my mark. Now, Tiffany's contribution to the development of American painting is hardly known, and it's overshadowed by his fame as a glass designer. It was not until the last 30 years or so that he was starting to be recognized as the truly important painter that he was, and he, and along with other society artists, started gaining wider recognition for their contribution to American art. A retrospective of his paintings held in 1989 at the Gray Art Gallery in New York gave the public a fresh opportunity to evaluate his work as a painter, and his recognition has been growing steadily ever since. Now, in describing his own paintings, he said they were one instant in time, a fragment of a happy day, and nothing more. His accomplishments as a genre and landscape painter were of great use to him later when he started to apply that technique to his stained glass window compositions that blended florals and landscapes and other natural elements to create these magnificent, breathtaking designs. His painting experience helped him to interpret his subject matter in a more intimate way, and he had a very keen interpretation and an eye for the play of light and shadow. In a speech in 1917 at the Rembrandt Club in Brooklyn, he said, "When I first had a chance to travel in the East and to paint where the people and the buildings are clad in beautiful hues, the preeminence of color in the world was brought forcibly to my attention. I returned to New York wondering why we made so little use of our eyes and why we refrained so obstinately from taking advantage of color in our architecture, in our clothing, when nature indicates its mastership." So he was now hanging on to color as a colorist, kind of like Vincent van Gogh did during the time of the Impressionists. And he moved from painting on canvas and vowed to devote himself wholeheartedly to creating a new avenue in art. He pursued it with boundless energy, this ambitious goal. He said, "The translation of my talent and magnificent color sense I will bring into environments designed for everyday living." Now, the United States enjoyed tremendous industrial and commercial expansion during the 1870s and 1880s, and with this economic boom came a great demand for luxury items from the leaders of the industry and other wealthy families who needed to show off their wealth and put it into their wonderful mansions. Tiffany not only possessed this artistic vision, but he was also a very knowledgeable businessman and had a natural marketing ability, and he saw this as a natural opportunity. In addition, he was in a position to draw upon his father's reputation for quality goods. So he gathers up three of his friends: a textile designer by the name of Candace Wheeler, a painter by the name of William DeForest, and another painter, Samuel Coleman, and he formed an interior design firm called L.C. Tiffany and Associated Artists. Did you know he started off as an interior designer? I love when I teach you something new. I like to do 5, so somebody keep track. The company was in business for about 4 years, from 1879 to 1883, and Tiffany was then 27 years old. And he stated that his endeavor would be, in his words, a business, not a philanthropy or an amateur educational scheme. "We are going after all the money that there is in art." Now, this group provided original designs for wallpaper and textiles and furniture and accessories, and all of these items were produced from local materials made by American artisans. Most of the designs, 99% of them, were created by Tiffany himself and were inspired by and adapted from the Oriental, Indian, Turkish, North African influence that he had in the years of traveling around the world. He was also a pioneer in the contemporary art movement known as Art Nouveau, meaning new art. The movement takes its title from a Paris art gallery named L'Art Nouveau, which from 1895 to 1904 sought to infuse European fine and decorative arts with what he felt was a breath of new air, something different, a little more on the modern side. And all over Europe, many young artists and designers were starting to rebel against the stifling art traditions and the commonplace, and this Art Nouveau gave them an opportunity to expand their ideas and move on to something beyond the traditional. Several Art Nouveau artists and architects used abstract forms, all derived from nature in their work, but Tiffany handled it a little differently. He rejected this kind of abstraction, and he preferred, in his words, to render the beauty of nature in a more traditional manner, but in a modern form. So he holds on to the traditional style and updates it to this modern elevation of Art Nouveau. In contrast to Victorian design practices, he worked without rules or patterns or formulas. His only and seemingly endless source of inspiration was the beauty of the natural world and its wide spectrum of colors. He expressly discouraged imitating or copying the style of others. He said, God has given us our talents not to copy the talents of others, but rather to use our brains and our imagination in order to obtain the revelation of true beauty. Tiffany spent 10 years traveling to and from Europe at a time when Art Nouveau was at its peak of popularity, and he understood its aims, but he helped to shape those goals according to his own artistic aspirations and ideas. In 1882, at the age of 34, his firm received an important commission from the United States President Chester A. Arthur to redecorate parts of the White House in Washington, D.C. And President Arthur, who was a native New Yorker, was very familiar with Tiffany's work and obviously admired it. Tiffany produced a large three-part glass screen to separate the White House's public area and the private area, as well as several coordinating mirrored sconces and wall sconces and a number of decorative elements that all brought in this good taste of art into the White House. Sadly, a mere 20 years later, President Theodore Roosevelt redecorated the White House again in a neoclassical style of simple elegance, and he had Tiffany's glass decorations removed and destroyed at his express order, break that Tiffany screen into small pieces. There's actually letters written about the tears that people shed over this breaking of this screen. Now, in addition to the Presidential Commission, incidentally, that color photograph is an artist's rendition from other photographs that were taken. That's not a color photograph from that time. You can kind of tell if you look at the people that it's a painting. In addition to the Presidential Commission, throughout the 1880s and into the 1890s, Tiffany and Associates decorated the homes of many of the wealthiest, most prominent families in America, including those of Andrew Carnegie, Henry Osborne, Havemeyer, John Taylor Johnston, who then was president of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Cornelius Vanderbilt, and the writer Mark Twain. If you ever have an opportunity, incidentally, to go to Rhode Island and look at those mansions, a lot of those houses have the decorations from the original LLC and Associates, the interior design firm that he created. Anyway, Henry Osborne Havemeyer, if that name sounds familiar, remember Mary Cassatt is the one who encouraged his wife to buy out, well, he was inspired by Tiffany, and he accumulated an enormous collection of Tiffany artifacts that later he donated, along with all the other art that was recommended from Mary Cassatt, to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They have an incredible selection of artwork donated by the Havemeyers. In 1883, LC Tiffany and Associated Artists disbanded, And mainly it was because Tiffany had now become increasingly interested in working almost exclusively in glass, and these other artists just didn't feel the same way. And the parting was amicable, but now Tiffany was free to accept design projects on his own, do his own ideas, and increasingly he focused his energy on developing new ways to further his goal, in his words, of infusing the world with color. So let's take a look at these incredible windows. His goal with the windows, he said, was to make a material in which colors and combinations of colors, shades, hues, tints, and tones are there without surface treatment as far as possible. And what he meant was without them being painted. He wanted the glass itself to represent the beauty. He didn't want something to be painted or stained on the glass. That's why it's called stained glass. Many of the other artists up to this point who created windows generally created that three-dimensional look by staining the glass or painting on glass. Tiffany was very much intrigued by colored glass, and he saw all that represented in his many trips to Europe and North Africa. As a colorist, he was deeply impressed with the examples of the old Syrian and Roman glass that had become iridescent after centuries of contact with materials in the soil where they were buried, and he was curious about that iridescence that was now brought into the surface of glass. Incidentally, the earliest glass in history was Egyptian in origin, and it was technically advanced. There's examples of this glass dated as back as 1450 BC. Glass is even mentioned in the Bible, along with gold and precious stones and other materials of great value. And out of all of these treasures, glass is the only material that was made by human hands. Tiffany clearly appreciated the implications of the value of glass. He was also deeply inspired by Europe's Gothic cathedrals, where there was a myriad of spectacular glass windows. The art of stained glass, incidentally, originated in Byzantine times, somewhere between the 4th and 6th century, and reached its creative peak in Western Europe. The oldest completely intact stained glass window is found in the Augsburg Cathedral in Germany, which dates back to about 1050 to 1150. That's the window on the left. My husband took that picture on a trip that he was on, one that I was home with the kids. You know, he traveled a lot in those days, but so I had to use that photograph. It's not as much detail, but there's some of the detail of the windows in the corner. Fabulous and intricately designed window. And this form of expression makes exceptional demands on the artist who creates its designs and requires a specially trained artisan to bring it to life. Tiffany would eventually have access to both the artists and the artisans. Now, he didn't like the contemporary technique of painting on the glass, which he felt obscured and disturbed the natural transparency of the glass. Instead, he wanted the glass itself to transmit texture and rich colors, and he spent much of his life experimenting to find a means to duplicate and even greatly exceed the effect of the medieval stained glass that he admired. He respected the innate properties of glass so much that it led him to his greatest innovation, the development of a glass he called favril. Now, the word favril is derived from the Latin word meaning fabrilis, meaning made by hand. And favril glass is produced by exposing molten glass to a series of fumes and metallic oxides that infuse it with these glowing colors and exciting iridescence. Incidentally, I do these lectures, all over, and I lived in New England for a while, and one of the communities, much like Hudson, that we lived in called Barrington, had a retirement community there where many people, we'd have 70 to 80 people come in and listen to the lectures, and at every single lecture, someone would tiptoe out and then come back in with an original Picasso, or I got to do a lecture next to an original poster from Toulouse-Lautrec. I mean, it was amazing. So I see this woman walk out of the back of the room, and she comes back with what looks like a wino's bag, an old paper bag. She's holding it by its neck, and she sits down. I'm doing the Tiffany presentation, and at the end, she comes up to me, and she says, in a very cute voice, she's about 90 years old, She said, is this worth anything? Now, a lot of people come up to me with, is this worth anything? And I don't even know sometimes, but sometimes I know a calendar that Norman Rockwell's got sketches in isn't really worth anything. So I looked at it and my knees started shaking. On the bottom it said A.COLL, meaning artist collection, and it said Tiffany on the bottom. It was an original piece of Favril glass. And you'd be surprised in how many of our grandparents' basements, like the Antiques Roadshow, you find pieces of this glass. They are worth a fortune. So we found an antique dealer in Boston. She said, I'm going to give it to you if you want it. Well, my husband wasn't there. Had he been there, he probably would have said, take the glass. But I didn't. I asked her if she had grandchildren. I took her grandchildren to an antiques dealer. The piece was worth $250,000. And it was sitting in the bag in the back of her closet, and it was kind of a mauve-y color, and she said, it just doesn't go with my furnishings. I should have taken it right then and there, but we had a glass, case made for it. It's still on display. Her family still writes to me. So keep in mind, look at these pieces. I know we've seen these somewhere before in our family's collection. Everybody's saying, doesn't that look like something that... So in 1880, Tiffany applies for at the U.S. Patent Office for a patent number for this Favril glass. And he got a patent dated 1881, the first patent for several different kinds and combinations of Favril glass. In that year, he registered 3 patents having to do with the production of the colored glass. Now in 1892, Tiffany opened a new glass factory in Corona, New York, where he continued the research and development and designing of improving his glass. And he used standard metallic oxides such as chromium and silver and gold, cobalt, even uranium in various combinations to achieve his desired translucency for this glass. Now remember, up to this point, glass had been painted to create these colors. Now he was making the glass itself have the color within it. And he claimed, and there was other glass manufacturers at the time, but nobody was doing anything nearly as close to this. He claimed that it took him 30 years to learn the art of glass making, despite the scoffing of his co-workers who just didn't believe it could be done. His trademark application now for the name Favril is also applied to his own glass, and that trademark was approved in 1894. Favril glass was a major breakthrough for Tiffany. To his mind, it surpassed even the best of the 13th century glasswork that he had seen and collected over the years. He used Favril glass with its hauntingly iridescent colors in all of his windows and lamps and vases and mosaics. According to experts, Favril glass also served as the emancipation of this style of art, and he created glass pieces that opened possibilities both pictorially and decoratively. Pictorially because of the limitless, I should say, atmospheric effects that you could achieve with these varied intensities, and decoratively because of its intrinsic beauty alone of the material itself. In fact, Favril glass was admired for its delicacy and was often described in contemporary literature. Now, he had a strong rival and a competitor in the glass business, a person by the name of John Lafarge. Happy-looking guy. That's the only picture I can find of him. And he, like Tiffany, was a painter as well as a decorative artist. But he was not Tiffany's only competition. There were 65 other design firms that were in operation in New York, which worked with glass to some degree, but didn't even come close to where Tiffany was. Tiffany and Lafarge were the 2 main competitors. And as a matter of fact, Lafarge sued Tiffany on a number of occasions for having technical advantages and a number of different things. He didn't win any of the lawsuits, but there was a constant battle going on between them. And they were the designers, Tiffany and Lafarge, who truly revolutionized the art of stained glass in the late 1870s. Prior to that time, window production had been of very poor quality and unchanged since medieval times. Glass was painted or stained rather than producing its own effect from within the material itself. Now, both Tiffany and Lafarge achieved, each in their own way, a greater density to the window by using more intensity of color. Lafarge from manufactured glass that he could buy from glass manufacturers, and Tiffany by using his own spectrum of hues. There's no doubt that Lafarge's work was an influence on Tiffany, but it helped him to move to more technical innovations and to even compete with him at a higher level. So it really, his inspiration only charged Tiffany even more. One of those inventions, one of those innovations, and so very important, was glass plating. I want you to remember this because you're going to be a master at Tiffany glass when you finish understanding this. That's layering one or more sheets of glass on top of each other in order to receive a greater depth of color. So when he had this magnificent color and he added it to this color and he put it on a stained glass window, what you saw through that was the combination of those colors. When you look at a Tiffany window compared to any other window, and you look at it on its side, I need to make some kind of a prop for this. And you look at the window and you look at it on its side, it's going to be all bumpy and wobbly and it's going to look like it was repaired. And many people think, wow, they repaired that so well, but you know, it's kind of bumpy. And that's because of the glass plating. Some of those sections have 2, 3, 4 layers of glass all soldered onto them. When you look at a Lafarge window or any other window, it's going to be completely flat. When you look at a Tiffany window, it's going to be all plated. Go out to some of these windows in Cleveland with some of your friends one day for lunch, and you'll say, I know which one of those are Tiffany and which one of those are not. So I'm going to make you an expert. That simple three-dimensional effect is what made, besides his intricate designs, but the three-dimensional effect is the reason why. He was also able to select glass from his own stock of thousands of different colored sheets, giving him this distinct advantage over his competitors who generally use the limited range of commercially available glass sheets. Now, he hired the best-known glass blowers and chemists, and he drew them from Italy and England, and he paid them very high salaries in order to develop the colors and textures that he envisioned. By 1895, he had created all of the glass varieties that he felt that he needed, and he was no longer purchasing sheets of glass. He was manufacturing it all on his own. Now that Tiffany had mastered color and the material, he needed to create a method for best utilizing the glass. So he developed a process for joining the glass pieces to create this intricate, detailed, enhanced design with the glass plating. You wouldn't have been able to do this with lead, put the layers of glass on top. So he had to create his own process. And what he created was the Tiffany process of the copper foil, which he invented, of using glass pieces in an intricate design. And the result was spectacular. You take a piece of copper foil and peel back the adhesive back. Then they didn't have the adhesive back. They would apply the adhesive. And you wrap the gold foil around the edges of the glass. Now you have a very thin area that's going to match up with the next area of glass that's been cut. So your puzzle pieces can be more intricate, more detailed. Instead of that wide channel that's like a U of lead and you're limited, the lead is soft, so it has to be thick in order to hold the window together. Now you have this piece of copper on copper. You smash it down really well with a wooden stick. Can you tell I love my classes that I took on Tiffany glass? And you can put pieces together in such detail. Then you run a bead of solder all along that copper. Now the solder is reinforcing all of those pieces, not just at the joints where the lead meets, but all the way through the whole piece. So it's a strong, detailed, intricate piece of glass. And you can imagine the pieces that you can put together can be so small, all you have to do is get that thin sheet of copper around it. So this produced, I'm getting excited here, I may have to rip this hat off because I'm getting hot, although you'll get a nice glare. The new procedure made an incredible distinction and increased Tiffany's technical advantage. You couldn't do anything even remotely close to this with a lead channel. Now, When Tiffany came out with this process, which he invented and he patented and he had all the ownership of, Lafarge could not compete for clients against Tiffany, nor could any of the other competitors at the time. And Tiffany also had these family connections through Tiffany and Company that put him in close, regular contact with precisely those people who were in a position to commission work. He just kind of blew out the competition. He was able to utilize his superior marketing ability, his keen business sense, and his connections in the world's rich environment to tap into the economic prosperity in the United States at the time of decorative arts. It was a perfect trifecta, the perfect combination. The pinnacle was in 1884 when he won a commission to decorate the New York's Lyceum Theater by underbidding Lafarge by 1/3 because he was using his own material. From all accounts, Tiffany won praise for the vibrant colors of his compositions depicting scenes of the year, color landscapes, florals, spectacular renderings of nature, and numerous commissions, including churches and synagogues. They seemed to spring up overnight in this period of economic prosperity. In 1875 alone, there were 4,000 new churches of various denominations under construction, and they all needed windows. For earlier cathedrals and smaller houses of worship, stained glass windows were often of inferior quality and would be imported from England or other European companies, but Tiffany and his wealthy clients helped improve this situation by creating them here. His most ambitious ecclesiastical project by far, up to this point, was a spectacular Byzantine-style chapel interior designed for the 1893 World Columbian Exhibition in Chicago, and it was located in his father's corporate pavilion. So it was meant to just display his talents. I wish I had some close-ups of this. The chapel drew over 1 million visitors and great international acclaim, and Tiffany was awarded no fewer than 54 medals for the variety of exhibitions that he had in this one chapel alone. Now, on October 30th, 1893, the last day of the Chicago exhibition, Mrs. Cecilia Whipple Wallace, known as Chicago's Diamond Queen, purchased this chapel for $50,000, and she donated it to her church, the Episcopal Cathedral of St. John Divine in New York, which was still under construction at the time and had to modify its construction in order to fit this chapel. And the chapel remained there for about 10 years. It was unchecked. Water damage took its toll on the architecture and the decoration of this chapel, and the chapel was eventually sealed off in 1911. In 1916, Tiffany removed it at his own expense, and after substantial repairs, he had it installed in his own home, Laurelton Hall, this luxurious Long Island estate that I'll tell you about. That's where he had it repaired and installed. Now, let me just step aside for 1 second. I know I step aside all the time. Can you follow me? I go really fast. I apologize. In 1882, Henry Flagler, Cleveland's entrepreneur and co-founder of Standard Oil, was interested in the historic city of St. Augustine and its potential as a winter resort. And his grand development project, the Hotel Ponce de Leon, was built in this Spanish Renaissance revival, which incidentally, if you haven't gone to down to St. Augustine, you've got to go down there and see this town. It's incredible. And the hotel design would complement its historic surroundings, which still look like this today, his Spanish surroundings. Louis Comfort Tiffany was hired to decorate this expansive interior of this hotel. And in 1967, the hotel closed and was sold to Flagler College. And it's been renovated, and it retains some of the most original integrity. There are 74 windows in all, just in Flagler College alone. I try to convince my kids to go to school there just so that I could see some of the interiors that are closed off to the public. Okay, but I'm back. Because of the great demand for his windows, he felt that he had to expand into manufacturing at a kind of an industrial scale. And despite the large scale, however, he personally supervised every stage of production. He designed just about every window. From the first sketches all the way to the design implementation, the selection of the glass, all the way to the actual manufacturing of the windows. Now, quality was of such critical importance to Tiffany that he insisted on employing the services of only the very best craftsmen, and eventually he got designers who did work on many of the windows, but still with his supervision and final design approval. His name will always be remembered for the beauty of the Favril glass in his glass windows, and there were approximately 5,000 windows produced. According to experts, the Tiffany windows originally ranged from $3,500 to $5,000, and that was considered expensive at the time. And they can be found all over the US, Europe, Latin America, Australia, even in Japan. Japan actually has an entire museum dedicated to Louis Comfort Tiffany's work. That's on my bucket list. Someday I want to go see that museum. Okay, let's move to mosaics. Did anybody know that Louis Comfort Tiffany did mosaics? Oh, I have a couple of you. Somebody keep track, I think that's 3 or 4. They were a natural progression for the extension of Tiffany's work and the use of those little pieces of glass on the floor. The glass mosaics were used in interior settings, initially for church interiors and fireplace surrounds, but then they eventually developed into full artistic works all their own. Inspired by Byzantine churches, Tiffany surveyed his European travels and used the ideas of those solid square cuts, or tesserae is what they're called, and he improved upon it by incorporating innovative techniques of modeling and shading and using those wide variety of colors that he had within the ranges of colors within the glass to create actual paintings that they look like paintings that are made from these mosaics. This is a mosaic in the Dream Garden, Curtis Publishing Building. And glass was also cut into different shapes to enhance the pictorial qualities. This garden landscape and fountain is a masterpiece of mosaic work with its subtle color shading and textured glass, uniquely cut pieces that are set in challenging pictorial composition. Okay, let's move over to the lamps. Now, the lamps can be traced back to history as far back as the discovery of fire. And Thomas Edison's introduction of the electric light bulb was a sensation, and it revolutionized the variety and the placement of light sources in your home. Now, the advent of the electrical era coincided with the emergence of Art Nouveau, and Tiffany, ever open to new opportunities, and of course the marketing genius that he was, both in business and aesthetics, leaped to the challenge, he said, of using electric light to coax the beauty from my extraordinary colors. That was the purpose of the lampshade, so that he could show you the glass that he made. He softened electricity's harsh light with these beautiful glass lampshades that were to become the key icons of the Art Nouveau movement worldwide. Coincidentally, in 1885, Edison and Tiffany both decorated that spectacular Lyceum Theater, Edison adding the electricity and Tiffany with all of the enhancements. And they maintained a social contact because they became very close friends. They even built retirement homes in adjoining neighborhoods in a Florida town when they were ready to retire. So to many people throughout the world, the name Tiffany brings to mind these stunning lampshades. Artistically, however, the stained glass and the mosaics is what preceded them. Remember, the production of this popular lampshade was actually a byproduct of using the many thousands of pieces of glass that remained after cutting the individual elements of the window. Peak production of the lamps occurred between 1900 and 1914, and although they continued to be made well into the 1930s, the lamps allowed more people to appreciate the striking beauty of that Favril glass and enjoy it in their homes. The subjects of his lamps were primarily floral with this seemingly endless range of colors. However, he also had some lampshades designed with geometric patterns. The lamp base was usually made of metal. Some cases they were mosaics. Some designed for a particular shade pattern, but most of them were just random combinations. Nobody knows precisely how many lamp styles were produced, but I found a 1906 catalog and it listed about 300 different models. In 1900, the average Tiffany lamp was priced at around $100, and the smaller lamps were about $40. They were luxury items that no well-to-do American family, who had a Picasso, incidentally, later in life, who wished to live in style, they were not willing to do without a Tiffany lampshade. Wealthy Europeans were also able to acquire them in Paris from art galleries who sold the Tiffany lampshades. Now, his lamps included a myriad of models from simple to complex. He always called them hanging bouquets. Now, the Lotus lamp is one of the most magnificent leaded shade base combinations ever produced by Tiffany Studios. The Lotus motif has its roots in Egyptian and Indian cultures, and for artists of the Art Nouveau movement, the Lotus represented rebirth, and this is one example of its well-balanced, harmonious work in this Lotus lamp. Inside of there are round bulbs, which actually there weren't, they were just invented primarily to be used in lampshades that Tiffany created, and then other lamp manufacturers started using the circular round bulbs. Okay, this lamp was sold in December of 1997 at a Christie's auction house in New York for $2,807,000. And it was originally sold for $240, which, you know, in the 1900s time, but $2,800,000 is a record price for a Tiffany lamp. Even at the time that it was made, it was very difficult to produce, and it was one of Tiffany's most expensive models. Eventually, they went into production and made it a little more intricate, and it became a $750 lamp. The studio produced just one Lotus lamp at a time, and once it was sold, they would create another one. Another Tiffany lamp recently sold at auction is the Peacock centerpiece lamp, sold in December of 1998 for $1,872,000. And this is the only one of its kind known to exist. It's a masterful combination of shade and gilded bronze base. And the peacock motif is characteristic of Art Nouveau. It's very rare among Tiffany lamps. There's no doubt that the Tiffany lamps were designed and assembled by highly trained artisans and superb colorists. He left the designing, however, of most of the lamps and their bases to artists that worked for him, a group of women artisans that were known as the Tiffany Girls. However, every single design that they created needed his final approval before it could be put into large-scale production. This was long before the women's suffrage movement. This was 1892, and he hired his first group of women artists to work for Tiffany Studios. 2 years later, he employed 50 women. One of the women, which I'm sure many of you know about because of Clara and Mr. Tiffany, I think that historical historical fiction book that's out now. Clara Driscoll was one of the primary Tiffany designers, and she was said to be the highest paid woman in America at a time when women earned an average of 60% less than men. She was also the hidden creative force behind these legendary objects. She's the one who encouraged him to do them. She's the one who kept them in production and created the designs. I think Tiffany probably would have died if word had gotten out that Driscoll actually designed his most famous lamps. There were letters found not too long ago written by supervisors of production that talked about Clara Driscoll and the fact that she actually made him famous because of these lampshades. She was born Clara Pierce Wilcott on April 2nd, 1861 in Talmadge, Ohio. And she went to school at an art school in Cleveland that eventually became the Cleveland Institute of Art. Did anybody know that? I think we're past 5. Her father died at a very young age, which was unusual at the time, but it gave her the opportunity to pursue her dreams and move on to higher education. She showed a flair for art, and she eventually, after studying in Cleveland and working for a Cleveland local furniture maker, she moved to New York and enrolled in the new Metropolitan Museum Art School. Her artistic potential was apparent when she was hired by Tiffany Studios, and she remained there for over 20 years, designing the lampshades, mosaics, not the windows, but a few of the windows, but not very many. He changed a lot of the designs on the windows of the women, but she was the one that was primarily responsible for the shades. Now, he always believed, and these are his words, that employing women would ensure a higher quality of artistry. Her salary was $10,000 per year at that time, which was unheard of at the time, even for a man. Now, when Candace Wheeler, one of his partners from Tiffany and Associated Artists, just insisted on receiving credit for one of his designs, he dissolved the company. When Clara Driscoll wanted to own the designs, he gave her individual recognition for her dragonfly lampshade and a number of other lampshades, and she won first prize in the 1900 Paris exhibition for 6 of her lamps. If you have a Tiffany lamp and you look on the bottom, if it says Tiffany Studios, New York, and a number, that's probably an original Tiffany lamp. If it says A.COLL, it's from his original collection. So bring it to me and we'll go find an antique dealer and we'll make a fortune. At the peak of Tiffany's career, about 30,000 items, most of them lampshades, were produced each year. Another proof of their success was the fact that there were imitations and copies that were sprouting everywhere like mushrooms after the rain. And there are a lot of reproductions out there of Tiffany bouquets, hanging bouquets. But his creativity in glass was not limited to the windows and the lampshades and the mosaics. In fact, he made vases and vessels. He introduced enamel work in London, where he exhibited plaques and vases made in his unique style, all having that febrile iridescence. Layers of translucent enamel in wide-ranging, naturalistic shaded hues were applied to a luminous surface, which was usually gilt, and finished with this iridescent coating that provided this rainbow luster. Tiffany was also very knowledgeable about jewelry trends through following art periodicals and international exhibitions, and of course his father's firm, to which he was appointed art director upon his father's death in 1902. His familiarity with jewelry manufacturing at the firm, as well as his collaboration with several pieces that he created for the Paris Exhibition Universelle in 1900, undoubtedly inspired him to create jewelry in his own workshops on 23rd Street. His first pieces were made when he began experimenting in much secrecy with the design and fabrication of the jewelry. His earliest designs were exhibited in 1904 at the Louisiana Purchase Exhibition in St. Louis, and he broke new ground at his studios using semi-precious stones and opals and moonstones, garnets, amethysts. Look at that piece in the corner. I really want that piece someday. They resembled that opalescence of his glass, that fiery glow of the opals kind of looked like the febrile glass that he created. And he set the stones in novel and inventive ways, often in combination with enamels. The brilliant translucence of the enamels complemented the luminescence of the stones, and he got the same effect with jewelry that he got with his windows. They actually rose to the status of being a work of art. One of the most outstanding collections of Tiffany's glassware, enamel, jewelry, and pottery is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, donated by the Havemeyer family and by Tiffany himself. This remarkable collection has at least one example of every single style that Tiffany produced between 1897 and 1913. In 1902, Tiffany designed what is regarded as one of his most notable and most complete works of art, his extravagant country estate, Laurelton Hall, which was started in 1902 and completed in 1905 at a cost of $3 million. Laurelton Hall was the ultimate expression of his aesthetic ideals, and it was envisioned as a total work of art. It was his dream home. Unfortunately, he only spent 2 months a year there, where creativity flowed, and he had it kind of as a display of all of his extensive projects and everything that he had done in his career. It was specifically designed to showcase his best work. There were 84 rooms in all. It was situated on 600 acres overlooking the Long Island Sound near Cold Spring Harbor in New York, and it was his summer residence. The mansion incorporated a mixture of Islamic and Moorish and Oriental and other themes, and of course he displayed his windows and lamps and vases and mosaics and even carpet designs. The grounds also contained separate buildings which eventually held the chapel and the one that he made for the Columbian Exhibition. He decorated the interior of the mansion with thousands of fascinating objects, and many of the pieces that say A.COLL were from Laurelton Hall. Some of these objects were virtuoso performances in their respective mediums. Tiffany was able to show his greatest capability. The Four Seasons window, for example, won him a number of gold medals and recognition in Paris in 1900, and other parts of the decor, the wisteria transom, for example, which went around 3 walls of the living room, all the way across these enormous rooms. It overlooked the dining room and the living room area, were stunning works of art that incorporated his favorite motif of nature. It's said that the landscaping alone cost more than the house itself. Now, according to the people who knew him well, he was an eccentric, overbearing perfectionist. He was very demanding of his craftsmen. He was also very kind and generous to his many employees. And the staff at Laurelton Hall respected him greatly, but not without a certain amount of trepidation, as did the artisans at the studio. Everybody really wanted to please him. He was known to walk down the lines with his cane and strike any piece to the ground and break it, any piece that he found unacceptable. Now, in his personal life, which is very quiet and isn't recorded in a lot of places, it turns out he was a family man. He endured a number of tragedies. 2 of his children died in infancy. His first wife, Mary Woodbridge Goddard, who he traveled around the world with, died in 1884 after 12 years of marriage, leaving him with 3 surviving children. A set of twins and another child. In 1886, he married a distant cousin, Louise Wakeman Knox, with whom he had 3 additional children before her death in 1904. And during a short illness in 1910, he was nursed to health by an Irish-born woman by the name of Sarah Handley, who remained his beloved companion for the rest of his life. Although he asked her to marry him on 3 separate occasions, they never did get married. Tiffany seldom participated in the New York social scene. He preferred to spend his time at home. However, late in life, he began to consolidate his legacy, and in 1913, he organized 3 lavish parties to which he invited wealthy and prominent citizens, cultural figures, and artists and politicians. One of the pageants was held at Tiffany Studios, which was transformed for the occasion into an Egyptian town along the Nile. The guests were asked to dress in the style of Cleopatra, and he provided each woman with accessories to wear for the event. Even the invitation was printed in hieroglyphics and delivered on a papyrus scroll. His children dressed in costumes and helped serve a dinner of roasted peacock. At the event, 45 artisans performed a dramatization of the history of art that he called The Quest for Beauty. That was just one of the parties. In 1918, he created the Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation, and he gave a substantial cash endowment as well as the Laurelton estate and property surrounding it to this summer colony that he started for young artists. And he explained that it's my dearest wish to help young artists of our country to appreciate more and study nature and assist them in establishing themselves in the art world. So he used his money and his influence in his home to help future artists. He was closely associated with the residents' activities, supervising the coursework, making himself available for guidance and advice. The foundation suffered serious financial setbacks in the stock market crash of 1929, and the residencies were discontinued in 1938. By 1946, the foundation had ceased regular operations and began selling its assets. By 1920, his work was clearly out of favor. He just plummeted to the bottom. Early in the Great Depression, his remaining stock was sold off at auction by the boxful. One major art antique dealer of the period remembered watching the now famous lamps being broken up on the sidewalks after the sale, and the glass was discarded and the scrap metal was sold to scrap metal dealers. These very same lamps, although they were mass-produced, now sell at auctions for millions of dollars. The ever-changing wave of artistic taste, as well as the harsh reality of the war, turned the tide against Tiffany and what remained of his artistic endeavor. Many of his works were removed from their original locations, discarded by their owners, and even vandalized, and his creative legacy was just brushed aside. Louis Comfort Tiffany's personal fortune, several $million at the time of his father's death, had been depleted as a result of his extravagant lifestyle and the establishment of the Tiffany Foundation, of his generosity. Tiffany Studios declared bankruptcy in 1932 with an inventory of some 200 tons of glass, palettes of 5,000 colors and hues, and they were left, these boxes of glass were left to an associate, and later the associate just gave it to one of the attorneys who was taking care of Laurelton Estate. Several decades later, 36,000 sheets of glass were acquired by Dr. Egan Neustadt, who intended to build a Tiffany museum, but he died before his dream became realized. Louis Comfort Tiffany died in relative obscurity on January 17, 1933 in New York, and his spectacular works in glass were all but forgotten. To add to the insult, Laurelton Hall's furnishing and objects were dispersed at a 5-day auction in 1946. Then a disastrous fire, still mysterious, which lasted for 24 hours, burnt Laurelton Hall to the ground. Within days of the fire, at Tiffany's family's request, Hugh F. McKeon, who is shown in this photograph, an artist who had received his residency at Laurelton Hall in 1930, went to the smoldering ruins and pulled out anything that was relatively intact, and he and his wife Jeanette purchased the remains from the salvagers for $5,000, cleaned everything off, and these objects, including the Daffodil Terrace, became the core holdings of the Charles Hosmer Morse Museum of American Art in Winter Park, Florida. Incidentally, one of our residents dropped off some brochures if you're interested in this museum and what's inside of it. I've got some brochures up here. It's a magnificent museum. The museum gives an overwhelming account of Tiffany's talents and his interests. Had Laurelton Hall's richly organic interiors survived intact, many art historians believe that this home would have been the most important historic house in history. It was only until the late 1950s, as pioneers of modern design were being rediscovered, that interest in his work was renewed. One book was written in 1964 called Rebels in Glass, and it was published to kind of surge the popularity of the Tiffany work. He was intensely passionate about the visual world around him. His artistic vision informed all aspects of his life, which he demonstrated in a multitude of talents in architecture and painting and designing interiors, landscapes, and all areas of decorative arts. He worked with more media than any other artist of his era. His life was devoted to a quest for beauty, and his quest was gloriously successful. No other American artist before or since has enjoyed such a universal reputation for versatility, creative genius, and uniqueness of vision, and no other artist was able to turn art into an industry. He embodied the artistic spirit of the Gilded Age. His career spanned more than half a century, from the 1870s to the mid-1920s, a time of experimentation and intense scrutiny of aesthetic ideals, but he proliferated a new style. Now, he left very little by way of personal journals or letters or, things that you could build a story, but you can only assume that he was flamboyant and theatrical and colorful. This was his own personal studio, which had a wood-burning fireplace in it in case his visitors were uncomfortable. He had a flair for the dramatic in his personal life that extended into the art that he created. Furthermore, he held himself and all of those who worked for him to the highest standards and was obsessive to the point of perfection. Together with his studio of artists, glassmakers, stonemasons, mosaic artists, modelers, metal workers, wood carvers, potters, and textile workers, they all brought in the notion of continuity of design, which is what Louis Comfort Tiffany was going for. He wanted to bring an orchestrated pattern of art into our lives, and I think he did the ultimate artistic expression beautifully. And I'm sorry I went over. That's the story of Louis Comfort Tiffany.
Production facilities for this program were provided by Hudson Cable Television, your window to the community. If you have comments or questions on this or any HCTV program, please leave us an email message at hctv@hudson.oh.us or call us at 330-653-2500. We'd love to hear from you.